Go.
Hello, CSL fans. My name is Drew or Marionette, and this is the CSL Week 2 Power Rankings. Uh, this will probably be coming out after some of the Week 3 matches have already happened. These do not take into account the Week 3 matches, these only take into account the matches of Weeks 1 through 2 and the ranking of players based on their ability versus their, record per se. The way I do power rankings, I guess I should preface this before we begin, is I basically I look at overall skill and plays and team building versus whether the opponent won or not. Because this is week 2, you'll see that a lot of the 2-0 teams are on top and a lot of the 0-2 teams are on bottom. That's just natural. But as time really goes on, it's going to become a lot more on plays and team building and just skills as a player. But I guess we'll just get right into it. Starting out at the bottom 4 division, we have 16th place of the Washington Weaviles. The Washington Weaviles just really haven't been holding it together the past 2 weeks with the negative 10 differential and 0-2. It makes them have the worst score in the entire league, as well as their division, obviously. Two notable misplays that were made throughout this season was in his match against Nefertum. He fire blasts a possibly heat-proof Bronzong instead of dark pulsing it with Houndoom, which really ended up costing him the match because he had no real answer to an Avalugg. So he just really needs to start thinking out his plays, and when he sacks off Pokemon, think ahead of the implications that it could actually have. And then he got 6-0'd by the Met Cargo Tel Aviv, which you'll see later in these rankings, but essentially it was just generally Met Cargo Tel Aviv outplaying him. He never made any horrible plays. It was just he couldn't grab momentum enough to be able to defeat the Met Cargo Tel Aviv. Something good about this team is though they did pick up Dragonite, so hopefully this will be able to, bump their records up further in future power rankings. So for the 15th slot, we have the Zion Zards. The Zion Zards played pretty well against their opponent in week 1 with only a 1-0 loss, but the opponent had some also notable misplays, and it didn't seem like a very skilled match as it could have been. The Zion Zards just really have not been able to utilize a lot of their more defensive threats very well. They've basically just been going hyper offense and have really no switch into anything, which was very apparent in the match versus Realies, where he really had no answers to Staraptor as well as no good answer to Kabutops as well. So the Zion Zards just really need to be using their defensive presence as well as their offensive presence in order to raise higher in the rankings. For the 14th place, I have the Southeast Swablu. This position might be a little debatable, especially considering the Swablu would have won the Week 2 match against the BC Bastiodons if it was not for a crit on the Muck. Either way, I think the match still could have gone the same way as it did if BC was playing smart. I do think that when faced with an opponent like we saw in week 1 against Realies, the Swablu really can't hold it together and they just kind of give up entirely once one bad thing happened. We never really saw the Swablu give up entirely in the week 2 match against BC because the match stayed pretty balanced in terms of number of Pokemon on each side. But once Realies started to slowly take away some of Swablu's Pokemon, take away some of Swablu's greater threats and greater walls, then the Swablu just kind of began to give up, which is something that the Swablu really have to improve on. For 13th place, we have the Memphis Mamoswines. I think the Memphis Mamoswines have been able to hold themselves together pretty well. They've had 2 incredibly hard opponents, both of which are sitting very high in the rankings, as you'll see later, being the New Jersey Flabebe and the Met Cargo Tel Aviv. The match with the New Jersey Flabebe could have been much closer between the two. I can't say there would have been a definite winner if a Will-O-Wisp had not missed against the Landorus Therian, but I think that either way, he still was able to hold his own together and have some really creative sets in the process. Met Cargo Tel Aviv, even though against the match of the Met Cargo Tel Aviv, even though he did have a couple risky plays. They ended up working out for him, and he made the distinction in his mind that, if I don't make this risky play, then I might as well just lose. So, he's willing to take these extra steps, which I greatly admire from the Memphis Mammoth Swines, and I think that's why they deserve to be slightly higher than the other three lower tier opponents. So we're going to move on to the, the third place division in a way, which is the 12th, 11th, 10th, and 9th teams. These are basically the teams I feel that may not be doing so hot in the league right now, but they definitely have a lot more room for improvement. They definitely are playoff contenders. Just currently in these top 2 weeks, they don't have as much as the ability right now due to either just opponents or maybe getting hacks or whatever. I feel like these are all playoff potential people, but like right now they haven't been able to hold it together. I'll start out with the Texas Toros. The Texas Toros basically got completely obliterated in week 1 by Krakenation. I think that he just had to really team build better for the Mega Meta Chan. He underestimated a lot of the offensive threats. You can call team matchup as much as you want, but if you can't accurately prepare for a team, at least to a point where you have some momentum at some point in the game, then there's really it just shows kind of what kind of a player you are when you kind of just see a team and you kind of just give up once you're starting to get swept. I also definitely think he's tried to set up with Groudon at the wrong moment against that match, especially with an Alamomola still alive, which really was hindering the team a lot. I think the Texas Toros just really need to look at their opponent's Pokemon and see really what is the threat and what needs to be gone before anything big can happen, which was shown a little bit more in the Florida for Alligators, but I think against the Florida for Alligators, they kept a much more defensive. They had much more defensive presence than offense. I'd like to see a little bit more offensive presence out of them in the future. For number 11, I have the Syracuse Sylveons. I feel really bad putting them in this position, but technically they're the highest 0-2 team, so this is realistically the highest I could put them. They had one very unfortunate match, the Houston Haunters. I was very close to putting them above the Houston Haunters, but I think the Houston Haunters have proven themselves decently enough to be put at least one slot above them, and I'll explain that a bit later. But I think that the Syracuse Sylveons faced one opponent and got hacked really hard in the process. I think, though, in that match, there were still a lot of notable misplays, such as just not knowing moves other Pokemon could run, or just not going for the correct move at the correct time, or just sacking something off that didn't need to be sacked. I think Dan needed to take much more time with his decisions, which was very much seen in week 2. I just think it was a bit overthought, and I think that just showed in the result of week 2 against Classy Zoroark, where Dan just kind of got shut down by a lot of the Pokemon that Dan was not prepared for. For the number 10 spot, we have the Houston Haunters. Like I said before, they just barely beat the Syracuse Sylveons, but I think they proved enough in their match against Zwoops and the Detroit Pyroar that they can really hold their own, especially against the Season 3 champion, making it down from what would have been like a 4-0 to whittling it down to a smaller loss, such as a 2-0. I think this team definitely has the potential to bring it back in a rematch against Swoops, or just in another battle against a higher threat. But either way, I think this team definitely has playoff potential. I think they just need to team build better and make their Pokemon a lot less situational, because that's what really messed them up in the match versus Swoops. For the number 9 spot, I have the Florida for Alligators. I think the Florida for Alligators have been playing very well. I think it's strange. I think they had a really good chance to win week 1 but lost, and had a really good chance to lose week 2 but won. I guess those balance each other out, but he really just has made a lot of over predictions that might not have worked out, and afterwards you start seeing a lot of safer plays from the end. Sorry. from the end result. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is the for Alligators started off making a lot more risky double switches, triple switches in their first week, and then looking at their play style in the second week, it was very, very predictable, which is something that they're going to have to watch out for when they hit higher, stronger teams, teams that such as teams that are going to be in the top four ranked or in the top of each division. So I think that's something that they'll really have to look out for. Moving on to with the start of the top half of the power rankings, these are really the people who have a really good spot at playoff potential, but haven't really hit that point yet. I think they have a lot more presence in the league than the others below, obviously, and I'll explain that a bit later. For number 8, I have the Calgary Hydro Cannons. I think the Calgary Hydro Cannons have been playing very well, and their prep has been pretty creative and spot on, seeing some very creative sets like an Ice Beam Tauros to take out a Garchomp, as well as a physical Nidoking to really shut down a lot of the for Alligators' offensive threats. I think the thing that the Calgary Hydro Cannons really need to just do is work more with this new play style they've had. Like they really wanted to try out stall for this, a kind of stall team for this season, which is clearly seen in the Mega Slowbro Blissey core, but they haven't had as much experience on it as I think they could be, and if they really begin to be able to build on that stall and be able to also utilize their offensive threats like Sylvan or Magzone, or use them as defensive threats if they need to. I think all the sets have been very one-dimensional, and they don't really need to be from the Calgary Hydro Cannons, with the exception of like an Ice Beam Tauros, though the prep still has been kind of spot on. For number 7 spot, I have the BC Bastiodons. This is the lowest ranked 2-0 team, just for the fact that I think the BC Bastiodons had the easier opponents compared to the other 2-0 teams. I think that they have made a good amount of misplays that could cost them against higher tiered players, especially the fact that he's just a lot more uninformed on certain things, such as thinking a Carbon can hold an Eviolite or that Dragon Tail doesn't have negative priority, which ended up possibly cost him the match if it wasn't for a crit against the Majestic Swablu. So I think the BC Bastiodons just have to become a lot more informed, have to become a lot more, take a lot more time thinking about their plays in order to really be able to be able to handle the higher threats on the list. For number 6, I have the NJ Flabebe. Basically, the NJ Flabebe and the Detroit Pyro are pretty much tied, but I'll get into more why I rank the Detroit Pyro just slightly higher. I think the NJ Flabebe have been playing well, except for the fact that they definitely had lost a lot of momentum in their Week 1 match against Dubstep Penguin, which is the number 16th ranked team. He got really lucky when Dubstep kind of just disregarded Heat Proof and let his Houndoom go down. I think this is less skill on the NJ Flabebe's part and more of lack of skill on the Washington Weavow's part. Being a new team, I still don't really see as much skill coming out of the NJ Flabebe as maybe I will from the others. Maybe that's just because they're a new team and I don't really know what they're all about, especially considering they've faced 2 of the lower threats so far, which is kind of why I rank the Detroit Pyro above them. For the Detroit Pyro, I think really that even though it was a very, very odd match with Classy Zoric, I think they both played very well, but both made different over predictions, which made the match look slightly off, even though I think it wasn't, in my opinion. In the match versus the Haunters, they were able to just really hold their own the entirety of the time. They could have preserved differential, but the Pyro were so focused on not going 0-2 after the devastating loss to Classy that they just were not willing to make any risky plays and just be safe and settle with a 2-0, putting them at a 1-1 and solid 0 differential. But I think definitely that Pyro, being the Season 3 champion, are huge threats in this league and ones that should definitely not be overestimated. They are the highest 1-1 team, but I think out of all the 1-1 teams, this is the only 1-1 team that has actually lost to a team that is in the top four ranked, a team that is in the top four ranked, or just a team that is really just a tough opponent that just really outplayed them, but they still played well in that match, if that makes any sense. For the top four teams of weeks 1 and 2, we have at the number 4 spot the San Diego Wild Chargers. Release has been playing very well this season, playing off 2 very impressive 4-0 victories, even though they were against the number 15 and number 14 teams. I think something that sets Release apart from teams like the NJ Flabébé is that they really held momentum the entirety of the match and never struggled to really reclaim it back. I think the San Diego Wild Chargers, with their cool, just creative form and unexpected preps, such as something like a drain punch life orb Jirachi, or a cool Kaboo top set with just like expert belt, and his meticulous detail with EVs just really helped them really thrive in this league format. Release has really just shown that he's not just a gimmick with a mill tank. He's an actual competitor in this league that should definitely not be disregarded. Being ranked in the top 4 and being able to really hold momentum against lower tiered opponents, but still being able to prove that he still has the ability to not back down or take anyone less seriously than they should be. For the number 3 spot, we have the Mad Cargo Tel Aviv. The Mad Cargo Tel Aviv have been playing very well, including a 6-0 against the upset Penguin and the Washington Weaviles, and a 3-0 against the Memphis Mammoth Lions, both of which are in the bottom 4 tier, or are in the bottom tier of ranks. But I think the prowess or the showing of basically them really just being able to hold momentum, especially in the 6-0 against the Washington Weaviles. Every turn, the Mad Cargo Tel Aviv was just outsmarting the Washington Weaviles, I feel. In the Memphis Mammoth Lions, they really held their own a bit more than Dubstep did, but I think that the Mad Cargo Tel Aviv was still able to be smart enough to keep their win condition being clefable, to really just be able to to recognize the thing that would help them win, to let them win the match. For number 2, I put the Boston Bisharps as number 2. Kraken Nation has been playing very well this season. Starting off, usually in the past CSL seasons, he usually starts off to a rocky start, but this is one of those seasons we're seeing him getting a very, very strong start, having a +7 differential and a 2-0 record. His opponents were a lot more, I guess, worthy, which made him a bit higher than the Mad Cargo Tel Aviv. In his match against the Texas Toros, he was able to 100% maintain momentum and not freak out when a Crawdonk got to +4. When a Dragon Dancing Crawdonk got to +4, he was able to maintain himself. He knew exactly what he was supposed to do. I don't think there's ever a moment in the match where he was not prepared for a certain thing, and he was not worried about a certain thing. Even in the match against the Calgary Hydro Cannons, even though he didn't really prep for the speed tie between Mega Slowbro and the Rioniclus and the Call Mind War, he was still very smart with a backup plan that said, if Rioniclus goes down and Slowbro sets up, then I have a Zatu to haze the stats away and be able to still continue my just offensive pressure on the team. And I think that the Boston Bisharps have just, over the seasons, been growing, not only just in the way they play, but also in their team building. I think a lot of sets are a lot more creative than what we see from Season 1 or Season 2 Bisharps that were very one-dimensional in all their sets. We've seen tons of different forms of Garchomp, including Shadow Claw. I think we've seen Adamant Bandit. We've seen a Swords Dance variant. They all... essentially, we've seen HP Ground Zatu, we've seen Haze Zatu, we've seen the Bisharps prepare for these more for specific situations that could happen. We've seen the Bisharps speed creep more. We've seen the Bisharps be able to be more creative in their team building, which will let them be a lot more successful later on. And the number one spot, it's hands down to the Saugatuck Sandslashes. I have to give this to the Saugatuck Sandslashes for defeating both of the two finalists of Season 3 in a way, an easy match for them. I feel with a +6 differential beating the top two teams of Season 3, like, that's just pretty impressive. That essentially balances out to a 2-0 versus the Pyro and a 4-0 versus the Sylveons. I think the Sandslashes were able to, with a few mispredictions, in the end they were still able to over-predict Izzy and the Detroit Pyro. They were able to over-predict Izzy and the Detroit Pyro. This Volt Turn team just really lets Classy always have momentum throughout the match, and it just really allows Classy to be creative with his sets, especially because he has options on his team to let him decide which sort of momentum he wants to bring, whether it's a Rotom Manectric core, or if he wants to bring like a Tornadus Crobat U-turn core, or combine any of the four really in any way to make the other mons he needs be a lot more creative and fitting towards the other teams. We've seen that in the past 2 weeks. We've seen in week 1 against the Detroit Pyro, the Crobat and Tornadus U-turn core was a lot too much to handle for the Detroit Pyro, as well as Kecleon, as well as the Sandslashes being able to play around with Kecleon, eliminating the Detroit Pyro's Rotom Heat right off the bat. It really just showed the Sandslashes' ability at predictions and being able to predict other people's over predictions. The match against the Syracuse Sylveons was a lot of a bigger shutout. The Sandslashes were able to figure out the Sneasel lead almost immediately and be able to just have offensive pressure the entire time on the Syracuse Sylveons, especially because Dan of the Syracuse Sylveons was really not as prepared as he thought he was for a lot of versatile sets, such as Grass Knot on Tornadus, or I guess Giga Drain on Crobat, even though that didn't come into play as much as it could have. But in the end, the Sandslashes did have two much more impressive victories than the other 2-0 teams, and that's why they are number one in the end. So essentially, these were the power rankings. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment. If you disagree with any of these, feel free to leave your comment and why in the comment section below. I'd love to have a conversation about who you think should have been number 1, who you think should have been number 16. But anyway, stay tuned for more CSL videos, and see y'all later.